In a prison where metal doors spoke louder than mercy, a quiet black janitor mopped the floor beneath the eyes of power. No one knew the truth folded in his pocket, a letter stamped by the governor himself. The day a white warden crushed his silver cross, the whole prison froze, and seconds later, a phone rang, and justice began to speak. The office smelled of wax and dust, the kind of silence that feels heavy enough to press on a man's throat. Fluorescent light hummed overhead, too bright for the hour. Warden Thomas Beckett sat behind his desk, the corners of a disciplinary report squared perfectly to the edge. His right hand rested on a pen, the knuckles pale from pressure. Across from him sat the janitor, an older black man in gray coveralls, his name stitched in fading thread, Samuel Cole. Between them, a small leather notebook lay open beside a dented silver cross. Both had been cleaned, as if someone cared what they looked like before the end of something. Beckett's jaw worked like he was grinding a sentence he couldn't swallow. "I'll need your acknowledgement of this," he said, voice steady but tired. The paper trembled when he turned it toward Samuel. Samuel didn't reach for it. He sat quietly, hands folded, gaze steady. The light caught a small burn mark on his sleeve, near the seam, where bleach had eaten the color away. He looked like a man who'd spent a lifetime erasing other people's messes, and maybe a few of his own. Beckett cleared his throat, forced a note of command back into his voice. "You understand what this means, don't you?" Samuel's answer came soft. "I do." Something in the tone made the warden flinch, not defiance, not fear, just a kind of acceptance that left no room for argument. He leaned back, rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You should have told me who you were from the start." Samuel looked down at the cross, the edges glinting under the light. Would it have made a difference? The question hung in the air like dust in sunlight, slow, weightless, impossible to ignore. Beckett's eyes shifted to the paper in front of him, the official seal stamped at the bottom. It bore his own signature from 5 minutes ago, though it already felt like someone else's hand had written it. "Why'd you come here?" Beckett asked after a long silence. "You could have sent a memo, a team, something official." Samuel's gaze lifted. His voice didn't rise, but it filled the room anyway. "You don't see a place by standing outside it, sir. You see it by sweeping the corners no one looks at." Beckett looked away, out through the narrow window behind his desk. The yard outside was gray, a few inmates moving in slow formation under a guard tower's shadow. "You made me a fool in front of my own men," he said. "No," Samuel said. "You did that yourself. I just didn't stop you." The warden's lips parted, then closed again. He stared at the man across from him, the one he'd mocked, the one he'd called names that still tasted bitter when he remembered them. Samuel sat still, hands resting on his knees, not triumphant, not smug. Just there, present in a way Beckett suddenly wished he knew how to be. "You could have ruined me publicly," Beckett muttered. Samuel shook his head. "Justice isn't about ruining people. It's about showing them where they broke something." The hum of the lights filled the pause that followed. Beckett's pen rolled off the desk, tapped once against the floor, then lay still. He bent to pick it up, and when he rose again, Samuel's eyes were waiting for him, calm, unjudging, like a man who'd already forgiven what hadn't yet been apologized for. "I'm sorry," Beckett said. It came out smaller than he meant. Samuel nodded once, not as acceptance, not yet, but as acknowledgement that the words had landed somewhere. "I know," he said. "The first sorry's always the hardest. The ones after get easier if you keep meaning them." The warden exhaled through his nose, sat back in his chair. His voice dropped. "I thought I understood order, rules. I thought keeping control meant keeping respect." Samuel's reply was quiet but firm. "Respect isn't fear. It's what you do when nobody's watching." The room felt warmer suddenly, though the light hadn't changed. Beckett looked down at the cross again, now resting on the edge of the report. He reached out, then hesitated, like touching it might burn. "You gonna keep that?" he asked. Samuel smiled faintly. "It's not mine to keep. It's a reminder. Belongs wherever it's needed most." He slid it toward Beckett, the metal cool against the paper. "You might need it more than I do today." Beckett didn't move to take it. His hand stayed an inch away, hovering like a confession that hadn't found the right words. "You should go," he said finally. They'll be waiting downstairs. Samuel rose slowly, the stiffness of long hours in his joints. He closed the leather notebook, slipped it under one arm, and looked once more around the office. The photos of academy graduates, the flag pinned just off center, the faint smell of old coffee. "You built this place on control," he said softly. "Try building the next one on decency. It lasts longer." He turned toward the door, hand on the knob. Beckett spoke again, the words barely more than a whisper. "Who are you really?" Samuel paused, half in shadow, half in the light spilling from the hall. "Just a man doing his job," he said. "Same as you were supposed to." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the corridor until they were swallowed by the hum of the building. Beckett sat alone, staring at the empty chair. He picked up the cross at last, turned it in his fingers, tracing the small scratches that caught the light. Outside, the intercom crackled, calling for evening rounds. He looked at the report again, his own name printed under "Suspension Pending Review." For a long while, he didn't move. Then he leaned back, eyes on the ceiling, and let out a sound that wasn't quite a sigh and wasn't quite a prayer. The voice of the old narrator returned, quiet and steady as dusk. "Sometimes justice doesn't knock a man down. It just asks him to sit in the chair he built for someone else." The fluorescent lights buzzed once, dimmed slightly, and in their trembling glow, the silver cross gleamed against the paper like a small, stubborn truth that refused to be erased. Morning light had a way of softening even the ugliest corners of Ravenhill. It crept through the narrow wire-meshed windows and caught the dust in the air like a quiet snowfall. Samuel Cole moved through the hospital wing with a mop and a small cart that rattled just enough to announce him before he turned a corner. He'd been on the job 3 days, and already the place knew his rhythm, the slow push of the mop, the pause to fix a crooked sign, the nod to whoever bothered to meet his eyes. Most didn't. To the guards, he was just another hired hand filling a gap in the budget. To the inmates, he was a ghost in gray coveralls, someone who never barked orders, never asked questions, and never seemed surprised by anything. He had a kind of gravity about him that made people lower their voices without knowing why. The nurse on morning rotation, Maria Ortega, noticed it first. She was in her 40s, Cuban by birth, shoulders squared from decades of doing more work than her title paid for. When she passed him by the med station, she caught him humming low under his breath, some hymn that sounded like it had been written 100 years ago for tired souls. She smiled faintly. "You sing in tune," she said. Samuel looked up, the corners of his eyes folding into small lines. "Only the parts I remember." "What church?" she asked, mostly to fill the silence. He shrugged. "The kind that fits wherever a man's standing." She laughed softly and shook her head. "You sound like my grandfather." "Good man, I hope." "He was," she said. "Stubborn as sin, but kind." He nodded once and went back to wringing out the mop. From down the hall came the metallic squeak of a gurney. Inmate Ray Alvarez, 23, tattooed forearms and a boy's grin that hadn't yet learned when to hide, was being wheeled in by a guard. He was recovering from a broken wrist, courtesy of another prisoner's bad temper. "Morning, Mr. Clean," Alvarez called out. Samuel smiled without looking up. "Morning, Ray. Keep your hands where they belong today." The guard snorted. "He doesn't know how." Ray rolled his eyes. "Man's just jealous my mama visits me more than his wife visits him." The guard muttered something and pushed the gurney into the exam room. Maria shot Ray a warning look. "One day that mouth's going to write you a check your body can't cash," Samuel chuckled, a sound like gravel underfoot. "He'll learn. Pain's a good teacher, but not a patient one." When the hall emptied again, Samuel leaned the mop against the wall and sat on the edge of his cart. He took out a small leather notebook, its edges worn smooth, and opened to a page filled with tidy handwriting. It wasn't a journal. Each line looked more like a list. Missing medical forms, unmarked syringes, expired bandages stacked in supply bins. He wrote 2 more lines before closing it. From the breast pocket of his coveralls, he took a folded letter with a red state seal pressed into the flap. He glanced at it just long enough to check that it was still there, then tucked it back. Around noon, Beckett's voice echoed down the corridor. "Inspection day, people. I want this wing shining like the governor's office." Maria rolled her eyes as she counted pill trays. He says that every week. Samuel said nothing. He kept cleaning, slow and methodical, while the footsteps drew closer. The new warden had been at Ravenhill barely 2 months, but already his reputation had outgrown him. Ex-military, 39, rigid spine and sharper tongue. He carried authority like a weapon he couldn't put down. When Beckett turned the corner, he took in the hall like a man surveying troops. "Looks better than yesterday," he said to no one in particular. His gaze landed on Samuel. "You're the new janitor?" "Yes, sir." Beckett squinted, reading the name stitched on the pocket. "Cole, huh? You from around here?" "Maryland born," Samuel said. "Family?" "Some," he answered. "Most gone. Some still trying not to be." Beckett smirked, not because it was funny, but because silence made him uncomfortable. "Well, keep at it. Floors don't clean themselves." "Yes, sir." Beckett started to walk on, then stopped. "That notebook. You keeping a diary or something?" "Just notes," Samuel said evenly. "About what?" "Whatever needs fixing." The warden studied him a beat too long, the smile thinning. "Good. Just make sure it's the floors you're fixing, not my staff." Then he moved off, boots ringing hard against the tile. When he was gone, Maria stepped closer and whispered, "He's been worse since the audit notice last month. He thinks everyone's watching him." "Maybe they should," Samuel murmured. She gave him a look that hovered between curiosity and concern. "You talk like someone who knows more than you're saying." He dipped the mop back into the bucket. "Knowing's the easy part," he said. "Saying's what gets folks hurt." The rest of the day passed in fragments, the hiss of machines, the clang of doors, the rhythm of work that never really ended. At one point, Samuel stopped to fix a leaking sink near the infirmary. The wrench slipped and grazed his knuckles. He didn't curse, he just watched a bead of blood bloom and wiped it away with a rag. Pain was old company. That evening, as the shift wound down, Maria found him sitting near the supply closet, eating from a paper bowl of soup gone lukewarm. She leaned in the doorway. "You eat slower than you mop." "Hard to rush something meant to keep you alive," he said. She smiled, arms crossed. "You got family waiting at home?" He shook his head. "No home right now, just rooms that aren't mine." "That's lonely," she said quietly. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But lonely's just quiet without anger." "I'll take that trade." For a while, they said nothing. The air smelled of bleach and old paint. Somewhere down the corridor, a radio crackled, a country song half lost to static. Maria finally asked, "Why come here? You're old enough to retire, not start over in a place like this." Samuel stared at the mop handle resting against the wall. "Some work still needs doing," he said, "and some truths hide better in dirty places." She frowned, unsure what that meant, but his voice carried the kind of certainty people don't question. When she left, he waited until her footsteps faded, then reached into his pocket and pressed his thumb against the embossed seal of the letter again. The edges were wearing soft from how often he checked it, like a man afraid something sacred might vanish if he didn't keep touching it. He unfolded the paper once more, eyes moving over the header, Office of Civil Oversight, State of Maryland, and the signature beneath it. He read the line he already knew by heart. "Mr. Samuel Cole is hereby authorized to conduct an independent humanitarian review of Ravenhill Correctional Medical Wing." He closed it carefully, the creases aligning perfectly, and slipped it back inside. Then he looked up at the ceiling, at the flickering light that never seemed to get replaced, and said under his breath, "Let's see what you've been hiding, Warden." Outside, the last shift bell rang, long and hollow. The day exhaled, but the air inside still felt tight. Somewhere deep in the building, a door slammed. Samuel stood, rolled his cart down the hall, and began his nightly routine. The mop's slow, steady strokes echoed like a heartbeat in a place that had forgotten what mercy sounded like. They brought the morning in on squeaky wheels and clattering trays, a parade of orderlies and guards, and one warden who liked the sound of his own boots. Samuel had been on the wing since before dawn, laying a thin shine along the baseboards, moving with the patience of a farmer setting irrigation lines. Maria checked vitals at the far bed. Ray Alvarez dozed, one arm strapped against his chest like a bundle he had no choice but to carry. The hall smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. Silence had the room by the shoulders when Beckett stepped in and shook it. "Eyes up," he called, clapping his hands once. "Inspection's not a hobby, it's a habit." He wasn't shouting. He had the kind of voice that carried because it expected to. Two lieutenants fanned out behind him, their faces arranged for approval. Harris, the youngest guard on the tier, trailed a step back, jaw tight like he'd bitten something he couldn't spit out. Beckett's gaze slid along the floor and landed on Samuel, who was wringing the mop with a twist that made the water hum. "You," the warden said, motioning with his chin. "Cart." Samuel angled the cart closer. The rattle wasn't nervousness, it was age. "Yes, sir." Beckett skimmed the shelves, spray bottles labeled in careful block letters, rags folded, a small leather notebook tucked into the side bin. He plucked the notebook out like he was choosing a cigar. "What's this?" "Notes," Samuel said. "On what?" Beckett flipped it open with his thumb. The pages were neat, each line a small verdict, missing forms, expired bandages, delays on saline orders, patients doubled up in rooms that should hold one. Beckett's smile showed the polite teeth he saved for photo ops. "You keeping a diary of my shortcomings, Cole?" Samuel didn't look at him. He glanced past the warden at the far bed where an old lifer slept with his mouth open, breath clicking. "I write down what needs doing, sir." "Sounds like criticism dressed as help." Beckett turned another page. At the spine of the notebook, taped with worn linen, a silver cross lay flat, no bigger than a thumb. The warden's smile chilled. "And this?" He held it up between two fingers. "You running a chapel out of my hallway?" Maria's pen stopped mid-word. Harris took a half-step forward and made himself stop. Alvarez opened one eye and watched like a kid peeking through a fence at a fight he didn't want but couldn't turn away from. "It's mine," Samuel said. "It's not in anyone's way." Beckett looked down at the notebook still open in his hand, then at the cross pinched between his fingers. He let the book fall. It hit the tile with a small clap, pages splaying like a bird that had met a window. He set the cross on the floor, very deliberate, the way a man sets a glass down so it won't spill. Only this was a performance. He looked at his audience, found them, and then set his heel on the metal. The sound was not loud. It was a quick metallic cry, a tiny thing giving way. Every ear in the room heard it anyway. One of the lieutenants smirked. The other pretended to swallow a laugh and failed. Harris's throat worked. Maria's eyes went flint hard, and for a second, she looked ready to slap the man who signed her checks. "Now," Beckett said cheerfully, grinding his heel a fraction more, "get that off my floor." Samuel crouched. He did it like a man picking up a child who'd been pushed, careful not to make more of the hurt by being clumsy with it. He lifted the cross with 2 fingers, wiped it with the corner of his sleeve. The dent was small, but it caught the light. He did not speak. He didn't have to. His silence made the wall clock tick louder. "You missed a spot," Beckett said, and nudged the mop handle with his toe so the wet head flipped and kissed Samuel's trouser leg. Water spread under the nearest bed, running toward a plastic wheel like a slow, clear snake. "On your knees, preacher." Alvarez raised his head off the pillow. "Hey, man," he said softly, "you don't gotta—" "Shut it," one lieutenant barked without looking at him. Harris's hands hovered near his belt, not because he meant to reach for anything, but because he had to put them somewhere. "Sir," he started, voice careful, "he can—" Beckett turned, impatient. "He can do what he's told, Officer Harris, same as everyone else." He faced Samuel again. "You deaf? Clean it." Samuel set the cross inside the fallen notebook, closed it, and set it gently on the cart. He stood without kneeling, bent at the waist, and slid the mop under the bed in a long, smooth stroke. He wrung it once, twice, the handle creaking like an old porch step. He adjusted the angle and did it again. The motion had nothing to do with obedience, it was competence, and it made a few men in the room feel smaller than the insults they'd hung their pride on. Beckett's mouth thinned. He stepped closer, close enough that Samuel could have felt the heat of his breath if he'd been the type to notice. 2 fingers flicked against the closed notebook in the cart. A little slap meant to say, "Remember who's in charge." "No trinkets on my floor," he said. "No charms, no superstition. We run on rules here." "We all do," Samuel said, voice even when the loudest man forgets. One of the lieutenants let out a short laugh, unsure of the joke but unwilling to miss it if there was one. Beckett's eyes sharpened. You think you're funny? No, sir. You think you're better than the rest of us? No, sir. What do you think you are? Samuel met the warden's stare. He had eyes the color of coffee left on a warmer too long, dark and steady with a tired shine. A man at work. For a second, Beckett looked like he might put hands on him, and maybe he wanted to prove he could. Compromised by planting his palm on Samuel's shoulder and giving a push. It wasn't hard, just enough to show the room whose hand was where. Samuel did not move. The warden felt the lack of motion like resistance and took his hand back as if something stung it. The hallway went still. In that strange way places sometimes do when they're deciding what kind of place they're going to be for the next 5 minutes. The hum of the vents and the beeping monitor and the distant buzz of a phone fused into a single high thread of sound. Maria's jaw worked side to side, trying to keep the words in that would cost her a job. Alvarez stared at Samuel with the helpless fury of a boy who knows what's right and hasn't yet learned how to make it happen. Beckett straightened his cap like a man resetting a crown. Get this through your head, he said lightly, too lightly. This isn't a church, and I'm not your confessor. You want to mumble? Do it on your own time. You want to work here? You follow my lead. Samuel's voice was almost kind. I'll follow the rules. I'll even follow a good man. But I won't follow meanness. It don't lead anywhere worth going. That got a snort from the lieutenant on the right. Philosopher with a mop. Philosophers got eyes, Harris said before he could stop himself. The room tilted toward him. He swallowed. Sir, he added, like an apology he was too late delivering. Beckett smiled again, the smile he used when something scraped his pride. He leaned in so close, Samuel could have counted pores. Let me make it simple, he said, pointing to the notebook. Next time I see you taking notes on my house, I'll take your cart, your badge, and your job. You can pray about it all the way to the gate. Samuel looked past him to the window at the end of the corridor, where a rectangle of light lay on the floor like a promise no one believed in anymore. Yes, sir, he said. It wasn't surrender. It sounded like a man agreeing the sky was blue. Beckett turned to go, then paused and looked back as if something had occurred to him that might be clever. He reached for the notebook again, fingered the edge, flipped it open as if to check whether the cross was back where he'd found it. It was. He tapped it with a knuckle. Keep this where I don't have to see it, he said. It offends my sense of hygiene. Maria found her voice. What offends mine, she said, clear as a bell, is a floor clean enough to reflect a man who doesn't like what he sees. The lieutenant swung to her. Beckett did too, slower. Harris shut his eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them and set his feet as if that might help her somehow. Beckett let the moment stretch until it thinned. Then he smiled the smile he used in staff meetings. Duly noted, Nurse Ortega, he said, letting the title sting. Mind your medication counts. He pivoted and left with his entourage. The sound of their boots went down the hall like a verdict and then faded. The room didn't breathe for a full 5 seconds. When it did, the first breath belonged to Ray Alvarez. Mr. Cole, he said, voice rough. You okay? Samuel lifted the cross out of the notebook and balanced it on his palm. The dent caught the light. He set it back, closed the cover, and placed the book on the cart like it was made of something that remembered. I'm fine, he said. He glanced at Maria. You? Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. I will be, she said. Harris stood where he was, hands open, as if he wanted to touch something he had no right to. Sir, he said, and flushed at the word. If you need, if anybody gives you trouble. Samuel offered him a small, real smile that made the young man look, for a second, like a boy being blessed without the ceremony. You do your job right, son. That's the help. He took up the mop again. The water in the bucket had gone cloudy. He changed it without being asked. He set the head against the floor and drew the first long stroke under the bed where the spill had run. The shine that followed was thin and honest. The cross inside the notebook was quiet. The day, which had started like any other, had chosen a side. Word travels fast in a place where time stands still. By the next morning, everyone in the medical wing had heard about the warden stepping on the janitor's cross. They told it differently depending on who they were. Guards said the old man took it well, inmates said he took it too well, and the nurses said nothing at all because they'd learned that silence was safer than opinion. But stories, like mold, always find air. By noon, even the cafeteria cooks were whispering about the holy custodian who didn't flinch. Samuel walked through it like a man through fog, aware of the shape around him but untouched by it. He worked the same slow rhythm, polishing rails, checking his list, refilling sanitizer bottles no one noticed had gone empty. Yet every eye that met him carried the same question. Who is he really? Maria saw it most clearly. When she passed him in the hall, he was writing something down on a scrap of lined paper, his handwriting small and steady. "You taking inventory again?" she asked, voice low. "Always," he said. She tilted her head. "That's not janitor business." Samuel's mouth curved just slightly. "Everything's janitor business if it's broken." She folded her arms. "He's going to come at you again, you know that." "I expect so." "Then why stay quiet?" He looked at her, eyes calm but carrying something older than fear. "Because sometimes quiet isn't surrender. Sometimes it's just waiting for the right echo." Down the corridor, Alvarez leaned out of his doorway, arms still in a sling. "Yo, Mr. Cole," he called, keeping his voice playful but not too loud. "You got fans now. Half the block's talking about you like you're some kind of saint." "Then they're bored," Samuel said. The kid grinned. "Still, respect, man. Ain't many could stand like that and not swing." Samuel gave him a look that might have been amusement, might have been sorrow. "Swinging's easy, standing's hard." By afternoon, the rumor reached Beckett. He didn't like the way it sounded. His own name tangled up in whispers, his authority chipped by a janitor's calm. He called a meeting in the admin wing, pacing the narrow office as two lieutenants stood at attention. "I'm hearing nonsense out of medical," he said. "Talk about insubordination dressed up as humility. I don't want this place turning into a sermon hall." "Understood, sir," one said. "But it's mostly inmate talk." "That's how rot starts," Beckett snapped. "One story, then a second, and suddenly I'm the villain in my own house." He stopped pacing. "That man's too comfortable. Find out what he's really writing in that book." When Samuel clocked in for night shift, he found his cart moved 3 feet from where he'd left it, a small detail only he would notice. The notebook still sat on top, but its pages were slightly out of order. He didn't frown, didn't mutter. He just set it right and began sweeping. The mop squeaked faintly against the tiles, a sound that could pass for prayer if you were listening wrong. Later that evening, he caught Harris lingering by the supply closet. The young guard looked nervous, shoulders stiff under the too big uniform. "Evening, officer," Samuel said. "Mr. Cole," Harris started, glancing down the hall. "You didn't hear it from me, but they're going to start checking your things. The warden thinks you're documenting him." Samuel's face didn't change. "And what do you think?" "I think," Harris hesitated, "I think he's scared of you, and I don't even know why." Samuel smiled a tired smile. "Fear's loud when it doesn't understand itself. You should maybe, I don't know, ease up on the notes for a while." "I can't," Samuel said. "They're not just notes." The young guard frowned. "Then what are they?" "Proof that someone's been paying attention." Harris studied him a second, then lowered his voice. "Whatever you're doing, just be careful. Beckett's got a temper when he feels cornered." "Then he shouldn't build corners," Samuel said and went back to mopping. That night, Maria found him again by the break room. She poured 2 cups of coffee, slid one across the table. "You're making waves," she said. "People are watching." "I've been watched before," he replied. "Not by a man like him. He's not just cruel, he's proud. That's worse." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "Pride's just fear in fancy clothes." She sighed. "You sound like my priest." "I doubt he mops floors." She smiled despite herself. "You could leave, you know, walk away before this gets ugly." "I could," he said, "but then what would change?" Before she could answer, the intercom buzzed overhead, calling her name to the infirmary. She left quickly, the smell of cheap coffee trailing behind her. Samuel sat there for a moment longer, eyes on the cracked tile beneath his boots. He took the letter from his pocket, unfolded it, and read a single line. "To observe, document, and report. He nodded once to himself, folded it again, and slipped it back. The next morning, Beckett returned to the wing with a different energy, smiling too wide, voice too calm. "Good morning, team," he said to no one in particular. "We're implementing a random security sweep today. Cooperation makes the world go round." Maria's stomach knotted. Harris shot a glance toward Samuel, who simply straightened, one hand on the mop handle. Beckett stopped beside him, scanning the card again. "You keep that notebook handy, Cole?" "Always, sir." "Let's take a look." Samuel handed it over without hesitation. Beckett flipped through the pages, the motion casual, but his eyes darted line to line. He found nothing but maintenance notes and supply lists, until the last page, where the corner of a second paper peeked through, a document embossed faintly with a seal. Beckett's pulse jumped, though he kept his tone even. "And what's this?" "Authorization letter," Samuel said, "from the vendor who handles inspection permits." "Vendor, huh?" Beckett slid the page out just enough to see the raised gold of an official emblem before Samuel's hand covered it gently. "Just a receipt, sir," he said. "Best not to lose it." For a moment they stared at each other. Beckett wanted to snatch it outright, but something in Samuel's calm stopped him, a steadiness that made violence look childish. "Fine," he said finally, tossing the notebook back. "Keep your paperwork. Just remember whose building you're in." Samuel nodded once. "I do. Every time I fix what you overlook." The words landed harder than any shout. Beckett turned sharply and walked off, his boots hammering the floor. Harris followed, glancing back only once, eyes full of the question he couldn't voice. "Who are you, really?" When the hall was empty again, Ray Alvarez leaned halfway out of his cell door, whispering, "You got guts, old man." Samuel wiped a streak of water from the floor. "No, son, just memory." "Of what?" "Of what happens when men like him go unchallenged." That night, he wrote in the notebook under the flicker of a dying bulb. Observation. Fear rising, decency shrinking, light still possible. Then he closed the cover, slid the cross between the pages, and whispered a single word before turning off the lamp. Soon. Outside, a storm rolled over the hills, thunder low and distant, as if the sky itself was clearing its throat. Inside Ravenhill, the whispers didn't stop. They grew teeth. Rain had been whispering against the high windows since dawn, a steady hush that made the whole prison feel like it was holding its breath. Samuel came in early, as usual, his cartwheels clicking down the corridor like a slow metronome. The storm had crept into the building, humidity clinging to the walls, air thick enough to carry a mood. When he reached the medical wing, the lights were already on, too bright for the hour. Harris stood near the nurse's station, hands in his pockets, eyes uneasy. Maria was there too, gathering files, pretending not to notice the tension crawling along the walls. Beckett arrived with 2 lieutenants right behind him. He wasn't barking orders today. He was smiling, tight, deliberate, the kind of smile a man wears when he's planning to hurt someone and wants witnesses. "Morning, folks," he said, voice like a blade dragging across tile. "We're conducting a little security review, nothing personal, just making sure everyone here knows who's in charge." Samuel set his mop aside, wiped his hands on a rag, and waited. Beckett motioned to one of his men. "Check the cart." The lieutenant moved without question, lifting rags, bottles, and finally the notebook. He flipped it open. "Here it is," he said. Beckett took the book, turned it in his hands like it was evidence in a crime he hadn't yet defined. "You and this notebook," he said. "I swear you write more than the nurses." "It helps me remember," Samuel replied evenly. "Remember what? My mistakes?" Beckett's eyes flicked down at the pages, scanning until they caught the faint outline of an embossed seal bleeding through the paper. "Well now," he murmured, "what's this?" Samuel didn't answer. Beckett tugged the folded letter out just enough to see the edge of gold on the seal. "Looks fancy for a janitor. Who you working for, Cole?" "Same as everyone here," Samuel said quietly. "The state." Beckett laughed once, harsh. "That's so." He waved the paper. "Looks like something from the governor's office. You running some kind of scam? Think you can dig up dirt and play hero?" Maria stepped forward before she could stop herself. "Warden, he's done nothing wrong." "Stay out of this, nurse," Beckett snapped. His face reddened. "You all think this is funny? This man's been taking notes, stirring gossip, hiding letters." "They're inspection reports," Harris said suddenly. His voice cracked but didn't stop. "The kind they send when an audit's coming." Beckett turned on him furious. "You know what happens to guards who forget their chain of command?" "Yes, sir," Harris said. "They remember who gave them the orders that broke the law." The silence that followed was so sharp it could have cut glass. Beckett's jaw tightened. "You want to join him in the holding wing, officer?" Harris didn't answer. His hands balled into fists, but he kept them at his sides. Beckett turned back to Samuel. "Pack your things. You're being placed under investigation for unauthorized possession of state documents." "You don't have that authority," Maria said. He ignored her. "2 officers escort him to isolation. Now." Samuel didn't move as the lieutenants stepped forward. "You can make this easy, old man," one of them muttered. "It's already easy," Samuel said, "because I'm not the one struggling to sleep at night." They grabbed his arms, not roughly but with purpose. Harris flinched but didn't interfere. He knew better than to fight it here. Samuel didn't resist. As they led him toward the door, his voice carried softly down the hall. "When a man shouts to prove his power, it's because he's afraid he's already lost it." Beckett stopped in his tracks. "What did you say?" Samuel didn't repeat himself. The door shut behind him, the echo like a closing hymn. The hours that followed turned the air sour. Maria couldn't focus on her rounds. Harris paced the corridor, eyes darting to the empty spot where the cart usually stood. Even the inmates felt it, the sudden quiet, the missing rhythm of the mop against the floor. "Ray Alvarez," asked Maria. "They get him?" She nodded once. "Isolation." Ray's eyes hardened. "For what? Cleaning too much?" "For reminding someone what clean looks like," she said. By afternoon, word spread that Beckett had locked Samuel in the old observation room, a narrow cell with a single bulb and a cracked window. The rain kept tapping against the glass like fingers asking to be let in. Inside, Samuel sat on the cot, hands folded, gaze fixed on the letter they'd taken. He didn't seem worried. He was listening to the water in the pipes, the footsteps outside, the slow hum of a system pretending it couldn't feel its own rot. Downstairs, in the nurse's lounge, Maria sat with a phone in her lap. The cursor blinked on the computer beside her, an email half-written. "To Maryland Office of Civil Oversight. Subject, urgent, possible interference with state investigator." Her hand hovered. She hesitated only a moment before hitting send. Meanwhile, in Beckett's office, the warden leaned back in his chair, staring at the confiscated letter. He hadn't opened it yet. The seal looked official. Too official, and that made him angry. He poured himself coffee, took a sip, then slammed the cup down. "He's bluffing," he said to himself. "No way the state plants a janitor." One of the lieutenants at the door spoke carefully. "You sure, sir? That paper looked—" Beckett's glare froze him. "I said he's bluffing." He shoved the letter into a drawer. "Tomorrow we'll ship him out to county holding until I verify." When he was alone again, the storm outside deepened. Lightning flashed, and for a brief second the cross, now lying on his desk beside the notebook, caught the light and gleamed. Beckett frowned, reached for it, then stopped. He shut the drawer instead, too fast, as if closing it might bury what he didn't want to know. That night, the power flickered twice, plunging the wing into darkness before the emergency lights hummed back to life. Harris was on patrol when it happened. He found himself standing outside the observation cell, looking through the tiny window. Samuel was awake, sitting upright, lips moving soundlessly. Praying, maybe, or thinking. Harris couldn't tell which. "Mr. Cole," he whispered through the slot. "You all right?" Samuel turned his head slightly, eyes catching the faint red glow from the exit sign. "I've been worse, son. They're saying they might transfer you." "They can't move what's already moving," Samuel said. Harris frowned. "What's that mean?" "It means truth travels faster than fear," Samuel said, "and it's already on its way." Harris stared at him, uneasy and unsure why those words made the back of his neck prickle. "I don't understand you." "You will," Samuel murmured. The next clap of thunder rattled the ceiling. Somewhere upstairs, the phone in Beckett's office began to ring. No one answered right away. It kept ringing, insistent and steady, as if the storm itself had a message that refused to wait until morning. Samuel closed his eyes and leaned back against the wall. The sound reached him even through the concrete, a distant bell calling time on something that had gone too far. He smiled faintly, the way a man smiles when he recognizes the beginning of an ending. The phone in the admin wing rang like it had a job to do. It had rung once during the storm and been ignored, then twice, and now, past midnight, it wouldn't quit. Beckett stood at the window with his back to the desk, watching rain slant across the yard. He'd left Samuel in the observation cell and convinced himself that was the end of it. When the third round of ringing started, the sergeant in the control bubble picked up, listened, went still, and pressed the transfer. "Warden," he called through the glass, voice suddenly careful. "Line 2. Beckett turned slow, the way a man turns toward a noise he doesn't like. He lifted the receiver with a hand that looked steady from far away. "Beckett." The line carried a clean voice, the kind government work polishes. No rush, no threat, just wait. He said, "Yes, sir," twice, then, "No, sir, I don't believe," and then nothing for a long heartbeat while the voice on the other end put its shape around the room. The sergeant watched through the glass. The lieutenants watched from the hall. Everyone knew when a tone outranked a man, even if they couldn't hear the words. When Beckett finally spoke, his voice was lower. "Understood." He hung up gently, as if the receiver had teeth, and stood for a second with his palm flat on the desk. The drawer where he had stashed Samuel's letter seemed to breathe under his hand. He opened it, took out the envelope, and felt the raised seal like a thorn through paper. He looked up at the control bubble. "Bring him out," he said. Down in the observation cell, Harris had been standing like a guard in a chapel, awkward, respectful, not sure where to put his eyes. He opened the door and cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole," he said, "Warden wants you upstairs." Samuel rose without asking questions, smoothing his sleeve where the bleach mark had faded to the color of old bone. The corridor smelled of damp paint and tired metal. They walked without talking. At the nurse's station, Maria looked up and met Samuel's gaze. He gave a small nod that calmed something inside her she hadn't known was shaking. In the admin office, Beckett had put on the smile again, but it had a crack in it now. He gestured toward a chair. Samuel didn't take it. He stood with his hands at his sides, as if chairs were for men who needed help standing. Beckett lifted the envelope halfway, like a stage prop, and then set it on the desk between them. "This," he said, "is a letter of authorization bearing the seal of the Office of Civil Oversight and countersigned by the governor's liaison." The words tasted sour on his tongue. He swallowed anyway. "It states that you are acting as an independent investigator assigned to review humanitarian care in this facility." Samuel didn't reach for the paper. He let the room hold the sentence until it settled. "It does," he said. Beckett's eyes slid to Harris and Maria at the door. "This is a secure matter," he said. "You two they can stay," Samuel said, not loud, not challenging, just like a man setting a mug down where it belongs. The warden's jaw flexed, but he didn't argue. From the hall came the low scrape of a wheelchair. Inmate Luther Shaw, the old clan relic with the long memory, had parked himself 3 feet from the threshold. No one had told him to move yet, and the look on his face said no one ought to try. Beckett tapped the envelope with his forefinger. "Why the charade?" he asked. "Why sneak in under a mop?" "You see a place better when people think you're invisible," Samuel said. "They stop performing. The truth gets tired of hiding." "And the notebook?" Beckett said. "Truth needs nouns," Samuel replied. "Dates, names, temperatures that went unchecked, doors that stuck when they shouldn't, nurses who did right and had to fight for it." The warden's mouth compressed. "You should have told me." Samuel's gaze stayed steady. "Would you have listened?" The question hung like the smell of rain, clean but insistent. Beckett picked up the letter and read aloud because he needed the room to share the burden. "Mr. Samuel Cole is hereby authorized to observe, document, and report conditions within the Ravenhill Correctional Medical Wing. He is to be granted free access and staff cooperation. Any interference will be referred for immediate review." He put the letter down and exhaled through his nose. "The governor's office followed up," he added, almost to himself. "They used my first name." Harris shifted his weight. Maria's shoulders lowered a fraction. Shaw scratched at his chin and grinned without humor. Told you, he muttered to no one in particular. Man writes your name down somewhere. It counts. You'll get your cooperation, Beckett said finally, each word like a heavy coin. He turned to the sergeant in the bubble. Effective immediately. Mr. Cole has clearance. He's not to be detained, impeded, or questioned without cause. Medical supplies requested by Nurse Ortega moved to priority, and somebody fixed the light outside observation. It's been flickering for 3 days. The sergeant nodded, trying not to look relieved. Thank you, Samuel said. He said it like a man thanks a clerk for handing over mail that already had his name on it. He reached into his pocket and took out the small cross that had absorbed a boot and kept its shape anyway. He set it on the corner of the desk, near the letter. I'd like this back where I left it, he said. Beckett stared at the cross, then at Samuel's hand, still open beside it. He picked the cross up and held it a moment. The dent caught the overhead light and made a tiny star. He placed it on the notebook and slid both across the desk. It won't happen again, he said. The sentence came out raw, like a man dragging a log up a hill. Samuel nodded. Good, he said. There's enough work here without adding new sins. They moved out into the hall as a unit without agreeing to. The air felt different, like a window had been cracked and the room remembered how to breathe. Harris walked half a step behind Samuel and caught a glimpse of the letter's seal again, its gold glow dulled by fingerprints. He felt ridiculous for feeling proud, but he did. Maria brushed past with a clipboard and a list, and didn't bother hiding the small, victorious set of her mouth. By the time they reached the nurses' station, the rumor had already outrun them. Inmates were quiet in a way that didn't feel like fear. A clerk who never made eye contact said, "Sir," when Samuel asked for the supply-closet key. Even the old vending machine by the break room dropped a can on the first try, as if the universe, touched slightly, had decided to give up a little mercy. Beckett lingered at the edge of it, as if the light on this side of the threshold cost more to stand in. He looked down the hall at the angled shine Samuel's mop had left that morning. In it, a man's shape could be seen if he chose to look. He didn't. Not yet. He cleared his throat. Mr. Cole, he said, you have cooperation. The psalm of the word apology stuck in his chest. He swallowed it and tried again. If there are deficiencies, there are, Samuel said, not unkindly. We'll write them down and fix what we can. Beckett nodded like a man learning yes for the first time. He turned to go, then pivoted back an inch. About Officer Harris, he said, glancing at the young guard. His record shows potential. Then keep him where he can grow into it, Samuel said. I intend to. It sounded like a promise to himself. Shaw clicked his tongue. Warden, he croaked, eyes bright. You see how quiet the place gets when folks remember what they owe each other? Beckett gave him a look that used to silence men. It didn't work. Shaw chuckled and pushed his chair backward with a small squeak, like punctuation. When the crowd thinned, Samuel slipped the cross into his pocket and walked the tier. He checked a drip. He noted a missing label. He wrote down the names of 2 guards who held a door without being asked. He caught Maria's eye and tilted his chin toward the supply room. Celine, he said. Already ordered, she answered, almost smiling. No argument. Imagine that, he said. At the end of the hall, the phone rang again, once, twice, then stopped. Whatever words it had left could wait until morning. The storm had run out of voice. In its place, a smaller, steadier sound came up from the tile, the hush of a floor drying the right way. Harris stood watching it for a second, like a man staring at a new road and realizing it goes somewhere he can walk. Beckett drifted back toward his office slowly, as if he'd lost something and didn't yet know it might be found by putting it down. He paused at the doorway, looked over his shoulder at Samuel, at Maria, at Harris, at the old inmate rolling himself away. He wanted to say something a different man might have said. He settled for not saying what the old man in him had been rehearsing all day. Samuel slid the letter into his notebook and closed it carefully. The cover had scuffs and the spine was tired, but the thing still held. He laid his palm on it for a breath, like a benediction without the ceremony, then picked up his mop. Back to work, he said to no one in particular. And the wing, as if grateful for instructions it had been missing, did exactly that. By morning, the air in Ravenhill felt different, thinner, lighter, as if someone had opened a vent that had been shut for years. Word had moved faster than paperwork ever could. Every guard, clerk, and nurse on the medical wing now knew the truth. The quiet janitor with the notebook wasn't just a janitor. He was an investigator sent by the state, and his report would decide who kept their badges and who didn't. Nobody said it out loud, but the whole place was standing a little straighter. Fear had changed direction. Beckett came in early, his shoes quieter than usual. He looked like a man rehearsing calm. He paused at the checkpoint, nodded to the sergeant who now avoided eye contact, and stepped onto the tier where Samuel was already at work. The mop moved in smooth strokes, water gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Beckett stopped a few feet away. "Mr. Cole," he said. The words were soft, deliberate. "We'll accommodate your inspection." Samuel didn't stop mopping. "Appreciate it, Warden. You'll have access to any file you need," Beckett added, "and staff cooperation, full." Samuel wrung out the mop, the sound a slow twist of fabric and water. "That'll do," he said. He looked up finally. "This place can still work, you know. Doesn't have to be what it was yesterday." Beckett nodded once, too quickly. "We're all trying to do our jobs." "Then let's start by remembering what the job is," Samuel said. His voice wasn't harsh, just solid. "It's not about who gets to shout loudest. It's about who's willing to listen." The warden started to answer, then stopped. He gave a curt nod and walked off, his shadow long and uneasy across the tile. Over the next few days, the prison began to sound different. Doors opened without slamming. Nurses no longer had to argue for supplies. Maria walked through the ward without bracing herself. She passed Samuel in the hall and whispered, "They sent new monitors. I didn't even have to file twice." He smiled faintly. "See? Small miracles." Even the inmates felt it. Alvarez, bandaged but restless, leaned against the rail one afternoon as Samuel passed. "You really some kind of secret agent, huh?" Samuel chuckled. "Nothing secret about wanting people treated right." "Well, you sure scared the hell out of the boss." "I didn't scare him," Samuel said. "Truth did. I just held the door open." That night, Beckett stayed in his office long after shift change. The blinds were half closed, cutting the room into slats of gray. The letter from the governor's office lay open beside a second document, his own suspension notice signed by the deputy commissioner. It wasn't final yet, just pending review. The words had a polite cruelty about them. He stared at his name at the bottom of the page, the ink still black and unblinking. When Samuel knocked on the doorframe, Beckett didn't look up. "Come in," he said. "You wanted to see me?" The warden sat back, rubbed his face. "The review board will send someone next week. They'll want interviews." "I'll be here," Samuel said. Beckett hesitated. "You planning to put it all in your report?" "All that happened, yes. And me." "You're part of what happened." Beckett let out a short breath, not quite a laugh. "Fair enough." He picked up the cross that sat on the edge of his desk. It had found its way there again somehow. "About this," he said quietly. He stopped, shook his head. "Doesn't matter. I'm not much for religion." Samuel watched him a long moment. "You don't have to be. That little thing's just metal. What matters is what you choose to crush or keep when no one's looking." Beckett's throat worked. "It still does its work, I guess." "It always did," Samuel said. "You just couldn't see it before." For a while neither man spoke. Rain had stopped, leaving only the slow drip from the eaves outside. Beckett finally stood, straightening his uniform like habit might hold him together. "There'll be a transfer request on my desk before the week's over," he said. "Different facility. Maybe it's for the best." Samuel nodded. "Sometimes the only way to fix something is to step away from it." Beckett looked at him, eyes tired but softer than they'd been in months. "You ever think about staying? Once you're done writing your report?" "This place has good people," Samuel said. "They don't need me to stay. They just need to remember." Later that evening, the shift turned over. Harris was logging equipment when Samuel came by with a clipboard. The young guard smiled nervously. "Place feels different," he said, "like somebody turned the volume down." "Quiet's not a bad sound," Samuel said. "Means the work's getting done." "I'm sorry about before," Harris said, "when they locked you up. I should have said more." "You said enough," Samuel told him. "Sometimes one voice is plenty, even if it shakes." Harris nodded, eyes bright. "They're talking about promoting me to training detail." "You earned it," Samuel said. "Don't forget what you saw here. It'll matter someday." When Samuel stepped out into the corridor, he found Maria waiting with a clipboard tucked under her arm. "You leaving soon?" she asked. "End of the week." "Good," she said, smiling faintly. "Means I still have time to buy you coffee that isn't made from powdered regret. I'll hold you to it." She glanced toward the office at the far end of the hall, where the light burned dim behind the blinds. "You think he'll be all right?" "He will," Samuel said. "Some lessons take root slow, but they grow deep." She nodded, and for a long moment they both stood, listening to the hum of the building. A softer hum now, almost human. Down the tier, a guard held a door open for an inmate pushing a supply cart. No one shouted. No one laughed at the wrong time. The rhythm of work was back, but steadier, cleaner, honest. As Samuel wheeled his cart to the end of the corridor, he caught sight of the reflection on the newly waxed floor. The cross glinted faintly in the shine near Beckett's office door, right where the first insult had been hurled days ago. He paused, smiled, and whispered, "Still shining, aren't you?" Then he pushed the cart forward, the sound of its wheels echoing down the hall, measured, steady, and unhurried. In the office behind him, Beckett poured the coffee he didn't need and sat staring at his own reflection in the black liquid. He looked smaller somehow, but not broken. The photo of his academy class hung crooked on the wall. He didn't fix it. Instead, he sat there a long time, listening to the soft rhythm of the mop somewhere down the corridor, a sound he had once despised. Justice had come and gone, but it hadn't shouted. It had walked the hall quietly, wearing gray coveralls and leaving a floor so clean it forced a man to see himself. They set the last day on a Friday, because endings feel kinder when there's a weekend waiting on the other side. Morning light came in thin as ribbon and laid itself across the medical wing, making the fresh wax shine like a lake nobody swims in anymore. Samuel arrived before the first count, rolling his cart with the care of a man returning a borrowed thing. He worked slow on purpose. Goodbyes do better when you don't rush them. Harris found him near the supply closet, the clipboard too big for one hand. "Training detail came through," he said, trying not to grin and failing. "They're going to have me shadow Sergeant Malone for a month. After that, maybe academy instructor." "That's a good road," Samuel said. "I wouldn't have stepped on it without—" Harris stopped, a flush rising, the way a boy stops at the edge of saying something that might be too honest for the hour. "You know." "I do," Samuel said. "Walk it steady. Folks will try to bend you without touching you." Harris nodded. "I'll remember." Maria came with a paper cup that steamed like a promise. "This is the real stuff," she said, "from the volunteers' lounge. Don't tell the nurses, they'll mutiny." She handed it over and leaned against the door jamb. They replaced the EKG monitors, 3 of them, and the meds arrived on time. I filed one form and nobody shouted. If I hadn't been here, I'd call it a lie. "Some lies," Samuel said, blowing on the coffee. "We get to retire." She studied his face. "You sure you can't stay?" "I like knowing there's somebody walking around who remembers where the bones are buried." "I've got other hallways to sweep," he said. "But this place remembers now. That's the trick." Near 10, a clerk from admin brought down a stack of folders with colored tabs and an apologetic look. "For your files, Mr. Cole." He addressed the title like it weighed something. "Everything you requested. Also your item." From the top of the stack, he lifted the small silver cross and placed it in Samuel's palm. The dent caught the light and flashed like a wink. "Thank you," Samuel said. The clerk nodded and fled, as if politeness might be contagious. Beckett did not come down right away. People said he was in his office with the blinds half closed. When he finally appeared, he stood at the far end of the corridor a while, as if getting used to the climate. Then he walked up, not too fast, hat in hand like he couldn't quite remember when he'd taken it off. "Mr. Cole," he said. The words were level, almost plain. "The oversight liaison will be here Monday. I'll be present for the initial interview, and then I'll be reassigned." Samuel set his cup on the cart. "You'll be all right." "That's not what I asked," Beckett said, then surprised himself by adding, more softly, "But thank you." They stood in a pocket of quiet, where the hum of vents sounded like a river far off. Beckett looked down at the floor, at his own reflection lying there clear as a photograph. He studied it the way a man studies bad handwriting and tries to read the better sentence beneath it. "I've been wrong," he said, as if testing the shape of the words in his mouth, "about what respect is, about what runs a place like this." He looked up. "I can't fix what happened. I can fix what comes after." "Start small," Samuel said. "Folks trust small when big has failed them." Beckett nodded once, as if making a note in the air. "There's a memo going out this afternoon," he said. "Conduct on the medical wing, access for observers, a grievance process that doesn't die in a drawer. Dry things. But somebody told me dry things are where justice lives." "Whoever that was," Samuel said, "you should listen to him." A wheelchair squeaked. Luther Shaw rolled close enough to be counted and stopped. "Warden," he croaked, "you leave this place better than you found it. You might sleep at night after all." Then, to Samuel, "You ever come back? Bring that hymn you hum. Been wondering how it ends?" "It ends like most good things," Samuel said, "not loud." Ray Alvarez shuffled out with his wrist still braced, a grin riding shotgun on his face. "They put me on a work detail," he announced. "Laundry mornings, kitchen afternoons if I keep my mouth shut." He winced. "Gonna be rough." "Your mouth's got a mind of its own," Maria said. Ray lifted a shoulder. "I'll lend it to the laundry for a while." He looked at Samuel, and his grin got smaller but truer. "You take care, Mr. Cole. You gave a lot of folks here a new story to tell." Samuel squeezed his shoulder lightly. "Make yours worth keeping." By midday, the corridor had the feel of a church after service, people moving quiet, not wanting to break the last good note. The sergeant from the bubble came down with a clipboard for Samuel to sign. He looked like a man who'd spent the morning practicing gratitude and found it stiff in the joints, but workable. "If you need to come back," he said, "you call me. We'll have a badge at the gate." "I'll keep the number," Samuel said. He turned the last corner with his cart and came to the spot near the nurse's station where it had all started, a dull scuff that had refused to buff out, a piece of floor that remembered being used wrong. He set the cross on the rail, took out his notebook, and wrote, "Final observation. The shine is honest. People, mostly. The rest will follow." He closed the cover and pressed his palm to it for one breath, the way you do when you leave a room and want the room to feel you leaving. Before he reached the exit, Beckett called after him. "Mr. Cole." Samuel turned. The warden held up a single sheet of paper. His own signature sat at the bottom, written with the clean certainty of a man who'd finally stopped negotiating with himself. "Acknowledgement of violation," he said. "Filed with my report, no excuses." "Then you'll be fine," Samuel said. Beckett worked his mouth once, then found it. "I'm sorry," he said, and this time the words came all the way from where they started. "Not for getting caught, for not knowing sooner." Samuel nodded. "Knowing sooner is the lesson men are always late to." They shook hands. It wasn't long, just long enough to count. Then Samuel pushed the cart toward the door. Harris walked beside him to the checkpoint, Maria a step behind, Ray waving from the rail like a boy seeing a bus off. The last lock buzzed. A guard hit the button and held the door a fraction longer than policy required. Small mercies were learning their way through the building. Outside, the day had cleared. Sun pressed through a stack of slow clouds and fell in a bright, simple stripe across the entry hall, right where you'd have to walk if you wanted out. Samuel stopped in it and let the heat find his shoulders. He took the cross from the rail and turned it once in his fingers. Then he set it on a small hook beside the med window, where light gathered and made ordinary things look blessed. It wasn't a gesture toward religion. It was a reminder in metal. What you crush, you become. What you return, returns you. The old narrator's voice, the one the day had been waiting on, came in from somewhere patient and familiar. Sometimes respect isn't a crowd standing for you. It's a man choosing not to step on what steadies someone else. Sometimes justice isn't a gavel. It's paperwork done right and a door held open and a mop stroke that doesn't miss the corner. Most days it's a hinge, quiet, oiled, reliable, swinging the same way for everyone. Samuel pushed the cart toward the gate. The wheels clicked over a seam in the tile and then stopped making sound at all because the floor ahead had been done right. In the reflection he left behind, a warden stood a little straighter. A nurse smiled without bracing. A young guard practiced the word "sir," like it meant care and not fear, and a kid with a wrapped wrist tried the shape of silence and liked how it fit. Out on the front steps, the air smelled like wet concrete and cut grass. A single hymn line rose from the chapel on the far side of the yard, only a note, only a breath, and slipped away on the breeze. Samuel listened until it faded. Then he went down the steps, hatless in the new sun, carrying nothing you could list on a form and everything that matters when the lights finally stop trying to bully a room.